Chapter 1. False Calm. Through the dim light of the monitor, Jack Fisher sat in a half-dark room surrounded by the sounds of silence. His eyes were fixed on the computer screen where old messages from Emily flickered. Time seemed to stand still. His mind buzzed with questions. How did it all start? Why didn't I see the signs? He couldn't tear himself away from those words as if they were the fatal road his life had spiraled down. Outside, the wind rustled, swaying the branches of the old oak tree, but Jack didn't notice the time or what was happening around him. He was trapped in his own thoughts, constantly returning to those distant days when everything was still whole, before memories of the past tore his life apart. It all started so innocently. In the early 2000s, social media was gaining popularity, but Jack didn't pay much attention to it. He was an old-fashioned man who preferred face-to-face meetings over virtual ones. But one day, his 13-year-old daughter, Maggie, approached him, asking if she could create an account on a new popular network. Jack felt a wave of anxiety. The internet was full of dangers, and he didn't want his daughter caught in the web of the digital world. "Lisa, I'm not sure this is a good idea," he had said to his wife when discussing their daughter's request. Lisa, always practical and pragmatic, smiled. "Jack, it's just social media. All the kids are on it now. If we don't allow it, Maggie will find a way anyway. Better to keep her under our watch." Jack nodded, though the anxiety inside him didn't subside. He agreed to monitor Maggie's page and created an account himself. But instead of the peace of mind he expected, social media became a door to his past, flooding his life with shadows of forgotten feelings and unresolved conflicts. One day, while browsing his feed, Jack came across a familiar name, Emily Hayes, the same Emily with whom he had been so close in college. She had been his best friend, the one with whom he shared his dreams and fears, though their relationship had never crossed the line into romance. As soon as he saw her profile, something clicked inside him. Was it nostalgia? Regret, maybe? He wasn't sure. A message notification blinked on the screen. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He started typing, "Hi, Emily, do you remember me?" But the reply was dry and cold. "Sorry, who are you?" In that moment, Jack felt a chill pierce his heart. How could she forget him? Their friendship had been something special, irreplaceable. He couldn't believe that she didn't remember. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the house, Maggie and Lisa went about their business, unaware that dark waters of the past were beginning to overwhelm Jack. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever, and that those old messages would be just the first step toward an inevitable catastrophe. Instead of a simple recollection of the past, social media had become the beginning of the end for Jack Fisher. Chapter 2. The Open Door to the Past. Jack couldn't shake Emily's response from his mind. "Sorry, who are you?" Those words seemed to etch themselves into his thoughts, and the more he replayed them, the deeper his confusion and hurt grew. He remembered every moment of their friendship, their long conversations into the night, their study sessions together, their endless walks around campus. How could she forget him? A few days after that first message, Jack decided to write again. He hesitated for a long time before sending the new message, but eventually mustered the courage. "It's Jack Fisher. We went to college together. We were close friends. I hoped you'd remember." The reply came quickly, but this time it was longer. "Oh, sorry, Jack. Of course I remember now. It's just been so long. What have you been up to?" Jack felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. Something about her response seemed insincere. As if she was just being polite, he began asking about her life, about what she was doing now. Emily's replies were brief and vague, as if she didn't want to delve too deeply into the conversation. Jack tried to rekindle the spark of friendship they once had, but each new attempt was met with a wall of indifference. It felt strange, because they used to talk for hours, sharing their most personal thoughts. Now, their communication felt strained and cold. Meanwhile, Lisa noticed that Jack was spending more and more time on the computer. One evening, she approached him as he was once again messaging Emily. "Anything new?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. "Yeah, just found an old college friend," Jack replied casually, trying not to give it too much importance. Lisa nodded, but something flickered in her eyes that Jack didn't notice. She knew Jack was a private person, rarely sharing his thoughts, but now he seemed absorbed in something that clearly troubled him. The next day, after returning from work, Jack sat down at his computer again. He wrote Emily a long message, reminiscing about their time in college, hoping it would trigger her memories. He described how they once dreamed of the future together, how they supported each other during tough times. But Emily's reply was once again cold. "Jack, I'm busy right now. Can we talk later?" It was the last message he received from her that evening. He felt something inside him slowly dying. Had he been wrong about their friendship? Maybe to her, it was just a fleeting acquaintance, while he had given it a significance that never existed. Jack began to wonder, what if he had created an illusion of their closeness? Reflecting on the past, he started noticing details he had overlooked before. Moments when Emily seemed distant, her hesitation when he tried to get closer. He began doubting his own memories, his perception of what they had shared. Social media, which was supposed to help him stay connected with his daughter, had now become his personal nightmare. Jack was sinking deeper into his past, trying to make sense of what really happened between him and Emily. But the more he dwelled on his memories, the clearer it became. The door to the past had swung open, and behind it lay something dark and unknown. With each new message, with each ignored reply, Jack felt his confidence eroding, his anxiety growing. He didn't know what awaited him next, but his instincts told him this was only the beginning of something much darker and more destructive. Chapter 3. Cracks in the mirror weeks had passed since Jack had resumed his correspondence with Emily. Her messages had become increasingly infrequent and terse, and Jack could feel his inner world beginning to crumble. Waiting for her reply had become an obsession. He checked his email and social media multiple times a day, hoping to see a new message, but more often than not, he was met with disappointment. His anxiety grew, and it started to affect his relationships with Lisa and Maggie. He became distracted, often lost in his thoughts, and barely spoke to his wife. Lisa noticed the changes in her husband's behavior but remained silent, hoping it was just a phase. Maggie, for her part, simply didn't understand why her father had become so distant. She tried to get his attention, but Jack, consumed by his thoughts, barely noticed her efforts. One evening, after an especially long day at work, Jack came home to find Lisa sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. She looked troubled, her face clouded by something she hesitated to voice. He walked past her, not noticing, and went straight to his study, where he immediately opened his laptop. When he checked his email and social media, there was nothing new. Emily hadn't replied again. Jack sat staring at the screen, trying to understand why her silence hurt him so much. He wasn't even sure anymore if he wanted to hear from her again, but the realization that she was ignoring him gnawed at him. At that moment, Lisa entered the study. She quietly closed the door behind her and stood in the doorway. Jack didn't notice her presence until she spoke. "Jack, what's going on?" Her voice was soft, but there was a hint of worry in it. "You're not yourself lately. Maggie and I can see it. Is something wrong?" Jack flinched at the sound of her voice. He turned to face his wife but didn't know what to say. His mind was filled with thoughts of Emily, and he suddenly realized just how distant he had become from his own family. "Everything's fine, Lisa," he replied curtly, avoiding her gaze. "It's just work." But Lisa didn't back down. She stepped closer and sat beside him. "This isn't just about work, Jack. I can see that something is bothering you. Maybe it's time to talk about it." Jack felt a surge of irritation. He didn't want to discuss his thoughts about the past, about Emily. It was too personal, too tangled. He didn't want to involve Lisa in the inner turmoil that was tearing him apart. "No, Lisa, really, everything's okay. There's no need to worry," he said, hoping to end the conversation. But Lisa was too smart to accept his words at face value. She had known Jack for many years and could tell he was hiding something. However, sensing that pushing further might do more harm than good, she didn't press the issue. Instead, She quietly stood up and left the room, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. When the door closed behind her, Jack felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. He knew he was drifting away from his family, but he couldn't bring himself to stop thinking about Emily. He couldn't explain why her coldness affected him so deeply. Perhaps it was tied to the fact that she represented the lost opportunities and unrealized dreams of his past. The next day, Jack decided to send Emily one final message. He typed it slowly, carefully choosing his words. Emily, I think I understand why you're keeping your distance. Maybe to you, this is just the past that's better left untouched. If that's the case, I won't bother you anymore. I just wanted to say that I valued our friendship and hoped we could keep it. He hit send and leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight on his heart. If she didn't respond to this message, he would take it as a sign that it was time to move on and leave her in the past. But when a notification for a new message appeared an hour later, his heart raced. Opening it, he saw a short and dry reply. Jack, I'm sorry, but I think you're right. It's better not to continue this. Take care. Those words felt like they had split him open inside. In that moment, Jack realized that all his hope of rekindling the past had been an illusion. Emily didn't want anything to do with him, and he was left alone with shattered memories and a growing sense of emptiness. The cracks that had begun to appear in his life grew deeper, and Jack knew they would soon lead to the collapse of something much greater. Chapter 4. The Collapse of Trust. Several months had passed since Jack and Lisa had that honest conversation about her affair. Their relationship had not recovered. They continued living under the same roof, but each day was a trial. Their conversations were reduced to mundane topics. Emotions were muted, and the tension in the air was palpable. Jack buried himself in work and focused on taking care of Maggie, who increasingly spent her time away from home, avoiding the conflicts between her parents. One evening, Jack came home late and noticed that Lisa was acting unusually. She sat on the couch, staring blankly into space, and didn't even look up when he entered the room. Normally, she would ask how his day had gone, but this time there was only silence. Jack assumed she had a rough day at work and didn't press the issue. As the days passed, the tension in the house grew more oppressive. Lisa frequently stayed late at work, and Maggie spent most of her time in her room, refusing to join her parents for dinner. Jack tried to restore some semblance of normalcy, but nothing seemed the same anymore. His attempts to engage in conversation were met with silence or indifference. One evening, when Lisa was once again late returning home, Jack made a decision driven by desperation and growing suspicion. He decided to check her phone, which she had left on the kitchen counter. He knew it was wrong, that violating her trust would only make things worse, but something pushed him to take this step. Jack unlocked the phone and opened her messages. He scrolled through a few conversations until he found one with a colleague named Greg. At first, the messages seemed innocent, but as he read further, his horror grew. The messages became more personal than intimate. Jack's heart sank as he read lines that left no doubt. Lisa was having an affair. His hands trembled as he closed the phone and slowly sat down in a chair. Everything he thought he knew about his family, about Lisa, suddenly shattered. He couldn't believe what he had just discovered. First, there had been Emily, and now Lisa, two women he had trusted, both betraying him in their own ways. His world was rapidly collapsing like a house of cards in a storm. When Lisa finally came home, Jack didn't say anything. He sat in the kitchen in the dark, listening to her every move. She entered, not noticing him, and headed to the bedroom. He heard her open the closet, change clothes, and get into bed. But instead of the usual feeling of comfort he once had when he heard her quiet steps, now there was only cold emptiness. The next few days, Jack walked around in a daze. He didn't know what to do. Inside, a storm of anger, hurt, and betrayal raged. He wanted to confront Lisa, to throw the truth in her face, but every time he tried to bring it up, fear gripped him. Fear of losing his family, of tearing everything apart for good. One morning, gathering his courage, he finally spoke up. Lisa was in the kitchen, making breakfast when Jack entered. He stood in the doorway watching her as she carefully avoided meeting his gaze. "Lisa, we need to talk," he began, trying to keep his voice calm despite the turmoil inside. She paused, not turning to face him. "What do you want to talk about, Jack?" Her voice was steady, but he could sense the tension beneath it. "I know about you and Greg," he said quietly. But the words hit like a hammer. Lisa froze. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the soft sizzle of oil in the pan. Jack saw her shoulders slump slightly, as if all her strength had drained away. She slowly turned to face him. Her eyes were a mixture of fear, guilt, and perhaps a trace of relief. She knew this moment would come. "Jack," she began, but he cut her off. "No need for explanations, Lisa. I just want to understand. Why? Why did you do it?" His voice was filled with pain. Lisa looked down, searching for the right words. "I don't know, Jack. Things just went wrong. I felt lonely." "You were so caught up in your own world, in your past. We grew apart." Her words cut deep. Jack knew he was partly to blame for the distance between them, but that didn't ease the pain. Everything he thought he knew was falling apart before his eyes. "And what now?" he asked quietly, realizing that their life would never be the same. Lisa looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know, Jack. Maybe we need time. Maybe we can fix this, but I'm not sure." Her words felt like a verdict. Jack knew they had reached the point of no return. His trust in Lisa was shattered, and he didn't know how they could rebuild it. He felt his world crumbling and understood that even more pain and uncertainty lay ahead. Chapter 5. An Unexpected Encounter. Several months had passed since Jack discovered Lisa's affair. Their relationship had remained strained and distant, with no signs of healing. They continued living together, but their interactions were hollow, devoid of any real connection. Jack tried to focus on work and his relationship with Maggie, but even those felt fractured. Maggie spent more time away from home, and Jack knew she was avoiding the tension between her parents. One day, Jack received an unexpected email, an invitation to his college reunion. At first, he was surprised to see it in his inbox, and for a moment he wondered whether he should even attend. The college held too many memories, most of them tied to Emily, the friend he had recently reconnected with, only to be shut out once more. The thought of seeing old faces, being reminded of the past, both intrigued and unsettled him, but something inside him said, "Go." Maybe this was a chance to break free from the present, to see if revisiting the past could offer some clarity. When Jack arrived at the reunion, a wave of nostalgia mixed with anxiety washed over him. Familiar faces greeted him, old friends and acquaintances who had changed over the years, but were still recognizable. The atmosphere was warm, filled with laughter and reminiscence. Yet Jack couldn't fully immerse himself in the joy of the occasion. There was a nagging feeling that something significant was about to happen. And then it did when Jack unexpectedly ran into Emily. She was standing by the bar, engaged in conversation with someone, but as soon as she saw him, she froze. Jack felt his heart skip a beat. She looked almost the same smile, the same sparkle in her eyes, the same gestures he remembered. But there was something different now, an underlying sadness or perhaps weariness in her gaze. Emily seemed just as surprised to see him and hesitated before stepping toward him. "Jack, I can't believe it's you," she exclaimed. Her tone tinged with surprise, but also with something unspoken. Jack nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions, relief, nostalgia, and a twinge of bitterness. "Yeah, it's me. It's been a long time, Emily." They exchanged pleasantries, talking about their jobs, their lives. But beneath the surface, there was an unmistakable tension. Jack could sense that both of them were holding back, aware that there was more to be said, more to be confronted. Finally, Jack couldn't hold back any longer and asked the question that had been gnawing at him since they last spoke. "Why did you push me away, Emily? Did you really not remember me?" Emily's expression darkened, and she looked away, as if gathering the courage to respond. "Jack, it wasn't that I didn't remember you. I did. But it wasn't that simple. I couldn't talk to you then." "Why?" Jack's brow furrowed, feeling the old hurt resurfacing, mingling with confusion. Emily sighed deeply. "Because of Nick, my husband. He was extremely jealous. I already knew our marriage was on the rocks, but he was capable of anything to keep me under his control. I was afraid of what he might do if he found out we were in contact again." Jack froze. He knew Emily was married, but he had no idea her situation was so dire. "But why didn't you just tell me that? Why pretend you didn't remember?" Emily finally met his eyes. "Because I didn't want to drag you into my problems. I didn't want you caught up in the mess of my life. You deserved better, Jack." Her words stunned him. For the first time, Jack began to understand why Emily had acted the way she did, but with that understanding came a sense of disappointment. He had spent so much time agonizing over her silence, when a simple explanation could have spared him the pain. They fell into an uneasy silence, both lost in thought. Jack realized that there was something more behind her words, a hidden threat that hadn't yet passed. But instead of retreating, he felt himself being drawn back into her life, as if everything that had happened over the years was leading up to this moment. Then, in a quiet voice, Emily said, "I'd like to talk more, Jack, but not here. There are too many people around. Could we meet tomorrow?" Jack hesitated, but then nodded, feeling his heart start to race again. He knew he shouldn't, that this could lead to something unpredictable. But he couldn't walk away. The shadows of the past had come alive once more, and he wasn't sure if he could stop what was already beginning to unfold. Chapter 6. A Web of Deceit. The following day, Jack arrived at a small cafe on the outskirts of town where he and Emily had agreed to meet. It was a quiet, unassuming place, far from the usual hustle and bustle, perfect for a private conversation. When he walked in, Emily was already seated at a corner table staring out the window. She looked calm, but there was an unmistakable tension in her eyes. Jack sat down across from her, and they exchanged brief greetings. For a few minutes, they both sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. Jack knew this conversation could reopen old wounds, but he also knew he couldn't move forward without understanding what was really happening. "Emily, what really happened back then? Why was everything so complicated?" Jack finally asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily took a deep breath and began to speak. "Jack, my marriage to Nick was a nightmare. When we first got married, everything seemed perfect, but that changed quickly. He was controlling, possessive. It started with little things, monitoring who I talked to, where I went, but it grew into something much darker. He began to make threats, saying that if I ever tried to leave or talk to anyone behind his back, he would ruin my life." Jack listened carefully, not interrupting. Her words rang true, but there was a certain edge to them that made him uneasy. "When you reached out to me, I was desperate, Jack. I wanted so badly to reconnect with you, to go back to those simpler times, but I knew Nick wouldn't allow it. He could have found out, and I was terrified of what he might do, to you, to me, so I pretended not to remember you. It was the only way I could keep us both safe." Jack could see the pain in her eyes, but something still didn't sit right with him. Why was she telling him all of this now? Why had she reappeared in his life if the danger was so real? "Emily, if it was so dangerous, why did you decide to reach out to me again?" he asked, searching her face for answers. "If you were afraid then, what's changed now?" Emily looked down, as if struggling to find the right words. "Because, Jack, I'm tired of being afraid. I can't live like this anymore. Nick and we're no longer living together, but he still controls everything. I want to get a divorce, but I'm scared of what he might do. He has so much power over me. Financially, emotionally, I need your help." Her words were sincere, but Jack felt a growing sense of suspicion. Why was she turning to him now? He thought back to all those attempts to reconnect, to rebuild what they once had, only to be shut down by her coldness. And now, when her life was falling apart, she wanted him back in her life. "Is that really all there is to it?" Jack asked, his voice growing colder. "You're not hiding anything else?" Emily looked up at him, fear flashing in her eyes. She hesitated before speaking. "There's something else, Jack. When I realized I couldn't be with Nick anymore, I started thinking about you. I know it sounds crazy, but you were always that one bright spot in my life, the one person who made everything seem okay. I wanted to try again. With you." Her confession took Jack by surprise. He hadn't expected her to be so direct, but along with the surprise came a chill. She was reaching out to him now at her lowest point, when she had no one else to turn to. Was he just a backup plan? "Emily, I don't know what to say," he responded slowly, battling the conflicting emotions swirling inside him. "You want me to be a part of your life now that everything is falling apart. But do you realize this could drag both of us into an even bigger mess?" Emily reached out to touch his hand. "I know, Jack, but I honestly want a fresh start. No lies, no fear. I realize the mistakes I made before, but if we could just trust each other." Jack pulled his hand away and stood up. His mind was spinning. He couldn't simply forget everything that had happened, all the emotions she had stirred up and then crushed. "I need time, Emily," he said, stepping back. "I can't just jump back into this. I have to think." He left her sitting in the cafe, walking away without looking back, feeling his heart break into pieces. Emily had re-entered his life, but she had brought with her something darker and more complicated. Doubts swirled in his mind. Could he really trust her again? Or was he just a pawn in her new game? Jack knew that this conversation was just the beginning of something bigger, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to face the consequences of the choices he would have to make. Chapter 7. A Shadow of Betrayal. Jack spent the next few days in a state of turmoil, unsure of how to proceed after his conversation with Emily, her request for help, her confession of feelings. It all felt too sudden, too tangled in the web of their complicated past. His instincts told him something was off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Was she being sincere? Or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? Driven by these doubts, Jack decided to dig deeper into Emily's situation. He began investigating Nick, her estranged husband, using old contacts and online resources. What he found only deepened his concerns. Nick was a wealthy businessman with a ruthless reputation. Stories about his controlling behavior and his willingness to go to extreme lengths to get what he wanted were common. But there was something else. A whisper of connections to more dangerous elements, people who could make problems disappear. One evening, as Jack was poring over his research, he received a text message from Emily. "Jack, I understand your hesitation. Let's meet again. I have something important to show you." The message left Jack with a sense of foreboding, but he agreed. The meeting was set for that night in a secluded spot near a small park where they could talk without being disturbed. Jack felt uneasy, but he knew he had to go. There were too many questions left unanswered. When he arrived, the park was quiet, almost eerily so. The dim streetlights cast long shadows, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. Emily was already there, standing under a tree, her face partially obscured by the darkness. Jack approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. "Thanks for coming," Emily said softly as he neared. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension that made Jack's nerves tingle. "What's this about, Emily?" Jack asked, his tone sharper than he intended. "You said you had something to show me." Emily hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. She handed it to Jack with a shaky hand. "This is everything you need to know about Nick," Proof of his dealings, the people he's connected to. I've been gathering it for months, waiting for the right moment. Jack took the envelope, but his eyes remained on Emily. And why now? Why are you giving this to me now? Because I'm scared, Jack, she replied, her voice breaking slightly. Nick is on to us. He knows we've been talking and he's not going to let it go. I need your help to expose him to end this nightmare once and for all. Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. What do you mean he's on to us? How much does he know? Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked away. Enough to be dangerous. He's already started watching us, tracking our movements. I can't stay safe on my own, Jack. I need someone I can trust. But Jack's instinct screamed at him that something was wrong. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. Emily, if Nick is that dangerous, why come to me? Why involve me in this mess? Emily took a step closer, her expression pleading. Because I don't have anyone else, Jack. I'm trapped, and you're the only person who ever truly cared about me. Just as Jack was about to respond, something caught his eye, a shadow moving in the distance. His senses sharpened, and he turned to look, but it was too late. The sharp crack of a gunshot echoed through the air, and Jack felt a searing pain in his chest. He staggered backward, the world spinning around him as he struggled to stay on his feet. Emily screamed, but it was distant, almost muted as Jack fell to the ground. His vision blurred, and the last thing he saw was Emily kneeling beside him, her face twisted in horror. Jack, no. Please, no. But in that final moment as the darkness closed in, a terrible realization dawned on Jack. This had been a setup from the start. Emily hadn't come to him out of desperation. She had come to him as bait, knowing that Nick would take the shot. She had played him perfectly, knowing he would do anything to help her. As the world faded away, Jack's last thoughts were of betrayal, of how he had been used by the one person he thought he could trust. And then there was nothing but cold silence. The shadows had finally claimed him, leaving only the echo of a life lost in a web of lies and deceit. Chapter 8. The final move. Darkness surrounded Jack as he slipped in and out of consciousness. The pain in his chest was unbearable, but what hurt more was the realization that he had been betrayed by Emily, the one person he thought he could trust. As he lay there on the cold ground, struggling to hold on, he heard voices, distant, muffled, as if coming from another world. When he finally managed to open his eyes, he found himself in a dimly lit room, unfamiliar and sterile. The beeping of medical machines filled the silence, and the smell of antiseptic hung in the air. Jack was in a hospital, alive, but barely. It took a moment for the fog to lift from his mind, but when it did, the memories came rushing back. The park, the gunshot, Emily. Jack's heart raced as he tried to sit up, but a sharp pain forced him back down. He groaned, clenching his teeth, and just then, the door to his room creaked open. A figure stepped inside, and Jack's blood ran cold. It was Nick, Emily's husband, dressed in a dark suit, his expression calm and controlled. He walked over to Jack's bedside, his eyes scanning the monitors as if he were simply checking in on an old friend. "You're a hard man to kill, Jack," Nick said smoothly, his voice carrying a sinister edge. "I have to give you credit for that." Jack tried to speak, but his throat was dry, and the words came out as a rasp. Why am I still alive?" Nick smirked and pulled up a chair, sitting down beside Jack. "Because, Jack, you're still useful to me. You see, this wasn't just about eliminating a problem. It's about tying up loose ends." Jack's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. "What are you talking about? What loose ends?" Nick leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Emily, of course. She thinks she's outsmarted me, but she was never in control. This whole situation, the affair, the setup in the park, was all part of her plan to get rid of me. She thought she could use you to gather evidence, expose my connections, and walk away scot-free with a nice little payout. But she underestimated just how far I'm willing to go to protect what's mine." Jack's heart pounded as he realized the depth of the deception. "So, you set this up? You wanted me to believe it was Emily? Nick chuckled darkly. Not exactly. I let her think she was in charge, let her believe she was manipulating you, but the truth is, I've known about her plans from the start. I've been watching both of you, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and now, here we are. Jack's mind swirled with confusion and fear. So what now? You kill us both? Nick's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. No, Jack. I have a much better idea. You see, Emily has always been ambitious, always thinking she's one step ahead, but in reality, she's just another pawn on the board, and pawns can be sacrificed. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. What are you going to do? Nick stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. You're going to help me, Jack. You're going to testify that Emily was behind everything, that she orchestrated the entire scheme to frame me, that she lured you into it, and that she planned to eliminate both of us. The evidence we found in that envelope, it's all there, perfectly curated to make her look guilty as sin. Jack's eyes widened in horror. You want me to frame her? She'll go to prison, or worse. Nick's expression hardened. Exactly. And you, Jack, will walk away with your life. In exchange, I'll make sure you disappear free from all of this. A new identity, a fresh start, away from all the chaos. Or you can refuse, and I'll make sure you don't leave this hospital alive. Jack felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had been used, betrayed, and now he was being forced into a corner where there was no good choice. But deep down, he knew one thing. He couldn't trust Nick, and he couldn't trust Emily. Both had played him. Both had turned his life into a nightmare. After what felt like an eternity, Jack finally nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. All right, I'll do it. Nick's smile returned, cold and triumphant. Good choice, Jack. I knew you were smart. As Nick left the room, Jack lay back on the bed, his mind racing. He had agreed to help Nick, but he knew he couldn't simply follow along with the plan. He had to find a way out, a way to turn the tables on both of them. But with every move being watched, every step calculated, he realized that his only chance was to play both sides against each other. In the end, there would be no heroes, no happy endings, only survivors. Jack had been drawn into a deadly game, but he wasn't ready to lose. Not yet. The final move was his to make, and this time, he would make sure it counted. As he closed his eyes, a plan began to form. It was risky, dangerous, and could cost him everything. But it was the only way to reclaim what little control he had left. The next time he opened his eyes, Jack knew it would be do or die. And in this game, there were no second chances.